Hi all, I got inspired to start yet another series. This one is on technical endgames. Endgames are one of my favorite parts of chess to study and analyze, and when I was looking over this game, I knew I wanted to make a video on it. This game was just played in round 5 of the 2025 World Cup between Uzbekistani Grandmaster Javokir Sindarov and German Grandmaster Frederick Svane. The starting position for this video will come from move 39 in the game. Black has just played the move h6, which forces a rook trade. Now, conceptually, this trade would benefit black. White has the bishop pair, and generally the side with the bishop pair wants to keep rooks on the board because the bishop pair is good at harassing rooks. The enemy rooks are always vulnerable no matter what color square they're on, so the side with the bishop pair can constantly threaten to trade a bishop for a rook, and thus make lots of tempo gaining moves. However, as you see here, after we have the trade, we have a pure minor piece endgame. The bishops also like imbalanced pawn structures. Bishops are better than knights in positions with passed pawns, and imbalanced pawn structures are more likely to lead to the creation of passed pawns. As you see here, though, we have a symmetrical pawn structure with 3 pawns on both sides of the board. However, despite the lack of imbalances to assist the bishop pair, Sindarov displays excellent technique and manages to win a crucial game in the World Cup. So, I'm first going to play through the moves with brief explanations, and then I'm going to talk about exactly why Sindarov won, and also the surprising defenses that Svane could have attempted. So, let's get going. First off, Sindarov preserves the bishop pair with bishop to e4, and already this is a pretty strong move. You will see him keep the bishop pair throughout the remainder of the game, and the first move that I would think of here, of course, is grabbing the b7 pawn. And I'm quite sure that Sindarov had to have considered it, but after knight d3, black is attacking both the bishop and the f2 pawn, but the bishop on c1 isn't the target. The target is actually the a pawn, with knight to c5 coming. And white could try bishop a3 to stop knight c5, but the thing is black can just do it anyway and go knight c5, and if white makes this trade, sure, they're up a pawn, but it's an opposite color bishop endgame, and black should be able to hold it. So Sindarov does keep all the pieces on the board with bishop a4, which is the best way to keep chances for white. So then Svane elects to place his kingside pawns on light squares, making the common defensive structure of f7, g6, and h5. This is a very robust defensive structure commonly used in defending the worst side of rook in games, and it can certainly be applicable here. So now Sindarov brings the king closer to the center. He goes first with f3, then g6, and now starts bringing the king with king f1. And after Svane moves the knight away with knight to d7, Sindarov takes the opportunity to try to imbalance the pawn structure with g4. And Svane is now in a pretty difficult spot. So trading pawns, if he just initiates the trade with pawn takes g4, then after the recapture, white's always going to have the ability to create a passed h-pawn at will anytime with h5. And as I already mentioned, the bishops do like imbalanced pawn structures, so this trade definitely seems like it gives white more winning chances. However, he may also not want to allow white to play g takes h5, which would give black a weak pawn h5 that white just may be able to win outright with the bishop later in the game. So Svane then decides to try to keep everything solid with knight to f6. This meets a threat with a threat, so he's threatening both knight takes e4, and he's also keeping the pawn structure solid, so maybe he can defend the h-pawn or take back with the knight if he wants to. But this does have a downside. This allows Sindarov to take the pawn on b7 without having to worry about a knight jumping to c5 and winning the a4 pawn. Now, this does come at the cost of the g4 pawn, so now he takes the g4 pawn, and Sindarov makes another excellent decision with bishop g5. This does look like a pretty simple deflection to win the pawn, but it does come at a cost because remember how white wanted to prevent knight c5 earlier, and he does choose to allow it here because knight d7 comes, and after f takes g4, black does get knight c5, and there's no way to keep the a-pawn defended. The bishop is under attack, and so after bishop c6, Svane manages to go knight takes a4 and take white's a-pawn, get a passed pawn of their own. And at first this may look like it benefits black because they do get the passed pawn, but this imbalanced pawn structure, if anything, will benefit white because they still have the bishop pair in an open position. So now white makes another excellent move, bishop f6. This saves the c3 pawn that was under attack and also keeps black's king out of the game. So now Svane needs to regroup, and under time pressure, he does find the best defense with bishop c5. This is a great move that will allow him to reroute the knight to b6 and will allow him to begin pushing the a-pawn. Now white begins bringing the king with king e2, and after knight to b6, white continues with king to d3. Black pushes the a-pawn, and now white wants to get the king over even closer. King c2 is the fastest path, but this allows black's knight to spring forward with knight to c4. And so Sindarov makes another excellent decision with c4, giving the king a path through c3. So now after a3, white goes king c3, and now Svane looks to trade the dark square bishops, using the pawn, the a-pawn as a distraction, and get white c4 pawn at the end, leading to a drawn bishop versus knight endgame. So his idea is to go bishop f8, and again, he just wants to trade it, push the a-pawn, get the c-pawn, and shake hands for a draw. But after king to b3, Svane asks for the trade, but white very wisely denies it with bishop to d8. This keeps the bishops on the board and also attacks the c7 pawn as well. And after black defends with bishop e5, white is just in time for c5, getting that pawn off the weak c4 square. Svane tries the very tricky and resourceful defense of knight to a4, hitting the c5 pawn and saying that this knight is immune to capture because if he did take it, then a2, there is no way to stop the pawn from queening. So instead of taking the knight, he just calmly defends the c5 pawn with bishop to e7. And now there really is nothing. There's nothing left for black to try. He goes king to g7, but the pawn on a3 falls. It was just indefensible at this point. A few more moves are played. Svane does manage to trade some pawns with f5, and maybe there's a universe where you can trade enough and sacrifice a minor piece for white's last pawn, giving white insufficient mating material, but we'll see that white doesn't have to allow anything like that to happen. He continues on making a passed b pawn, but he's in no hurry to play b7. He first decides to come in with king c4 and is preparing to cut the bishop off eventually with bishop d6. He makes a couple more moves, bishop d7, just getting this f pawn if he needs to. And after knight g2, now the d5 square is available for the king, so king to d5, bishop g3. The pawns trade off, and after bishop f4, bishop e4, the knight is hemmed in, and Svane does move the knight, but it gets captured, and here black resigns because after the recapture, bishop d6 is coming, and then there is no way to stop the pawn from queening. So let's go back to the starting position of this video. I gave you a summary of what happened, but why did this happen? I mentioned that rooks hate coordinated bishops because a pair of bishops can harass valuable pieces. However, this endgame should be fine for black, right? It's a pure minor piece endgame with symmetrical pawn structure. However, there is one piece I didn't mention, and it's arguably the most important piece in the endgame, the king. This is why white won. This was the key. White won because the bishop pair was able to keep black's king out of the game, while black was powerless to keep white's king from coming to the queen side. Specifically, if we jump to the position on move 49, after white plays bishop to f6, you notice that black's king has no way into the game. All of the entry squares are covered, and so white was then able to win on the queen side by involving the king. So now there are two defenses I want to draw attention to for black. There is a strategic defense and a tactical defense. The strategic defense is on move 44. In this position, so I'll get here, move 44. After g4, in this position, Svane played knight f6. Instead, there was a brilliant idea attached to knight c5. And after bishop to c2, black could have played f5. This move is just spectacular. White can again imbalance the pawn structure after trading, and black gets the a pawn, but this is the imbalance black wants. White gets to imbalance the pawn structure, but this is much better for black because white's advantage is now on the king side, not the queen side. And what this means is that black's king now has a clear function. It helps contain the f-pawn and potentially the h-pawn if necessary. And this tiny shift changes the entire nature of the position from one where black's king had no useful role to where black's king suddenly becomes a very important defender. So instead of black bringing their king to the action, they can manipulate the position to bring the action to their king. We talk all the time in endgames about bringing your king into the game. But if that's not possible, can you bring the game to your king? This is a new perspective I hadn't really thought of in that way before, and I think it just shows how deep, brilliant, beautiful, and difficult chess is. When chess is described as a blend of art and science, it's these types of positions where you uncover a new way of thinking by studying them. They reveal something to you under the surface. So to me, this was the more beautiful defense, but I also want to point out a tactical option on move 53. So here Svane went for the bishop f8 idea in severe time pressure, but it was possible to save the game with a2. And first off, this just seems like it's going to lose the pawn eventually, because after king to b3, white wants to keep the c-pawn, so they're going to go king to b3 to keep that defended and stop the a-pawn with the bishop. But since it's the bishop that's in charge of stopping the a-pawn, black has time to distract the bishop and has the resource of bishop to e7. Now, white does have to keep the bishop on the diagonal, so we'll say that they go with bishop to e5, which also goes for the c7 pawn, but now black has a chance to get the h-pawn. Let's say white goes like they did in the game with c5, and now, as I like to say, when you have a piece under attack, that's the last piece you should think about moving. And here, black could again go for this distraction idea with bishop to g3, and white's best try now is bishop to b2, allowing him to come to a3 later with the bishop to defend the c5 pawn if needed. So black moves the knight to the only square of c8, and after white takes the pawn, the merit of bishop b2 is shown after bishop b2, bishop to a3. Here black can go f5, and now after a trade, we reach a scenario as I described earlier. White will most likely need to give up one of their remaining pawns if they ever want to win the c7 pawn, but then with just one pawn remaining, black can give the knight for that pawn and make a draw. So yeah, this was just an excellent game, really by both players. It takes both players just to make a masterpiece, and Svane had very tenacious defense, unfortunately, and the time pressure was unable to save the game and not able to find the right idea, but Sindarov displayed fantastic technique, just making the right move turn after turn and able to score a victory in this crucial game of the World Cup. So many congratulations to him for this excellently played game and for the implications it has in the tournament, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of these games and hopefully making some more recaps for you guys. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.